What's up, Jets fans, and welcome to another edition of Jet Nation Live. We are your hosts, Dylan Terriman and Glenn Naughton. I would say we're in the slow portion of the off season, but I feel like with the Jets, there's never truly a slow part of the off season. But we're here. We have some fun topics, some that just make us laugh a little bit, some lists that we've seen curated on Twitter for the off season that we want to discuss, and we have OTA pressers that I think gave us a little bit more answers than I think people realize. So, Glenn, how we doing tonight? I know you're a little under the weather. Thanks for doing this.
Yeah. I have a pretty ridiculous cold, so I may have to mute myself a few times to not cough and hack into the mic. Um, yeah, look, it's the downtime of the off season's coming, and it's going to get a lot slower that in the coming weeks than it is now. Once the OTAs wrap up and there's no news, that's when it gets it's really a slow drag. So hopefully we push through that this off season and get to camp.
Yeah, camp. I said it to somebody the other day. I don't want to rush summer along, but like this is the one time of the year when I'm just like looking ahead to late August and those days of camp and just staring at the Twitter timeline again, just trying to figure out all the starting lineup combinations and the personnel uses that the Jets are putting out. So I don't want to rush it away, but seeing some of the articles, and we can probably start right there, seeing some of the articles come out about Aaron Rodgers that aren't from the New York Jets beat writers at all. They're coming from Packers guys and now apparently this Giants beat reporter. I don't even know who he writes for, but these funny articles that say Daniel Jones is better than Aaron Rodgers, or the ones that are still going down the rabbit hole, figuring out the whole Packers divorce. Any comments on those? I know there was a couple key takeaways in the Athletic article, but the Daniel Jones one, can we just laugh about that for 30 seconds to begin?
I mean, the Jones article I didn't read. I saw the headline. Someone posted it to Jet Nation, the forums at jetnation.com, and I saw that and just shook my head. I didn't read one word of it. And the Aaron Rodgers, same with the Aaron Rodgers. I saw a couple of tweets. Did this one? It's almost like an angry teenage girl scripted movie. Did this one say this about that one? Was so and so dropping a hint about this person? You
Mm-hmm.
know, did Stacy tell Lucy? It's just like I can't think of the movie, like almost Clueless. Like I'm trying to think of like a teenage girl drama type of thing, and that's what these stories remind me of. And again, on top of everything, it's clickbait. Like no football to report. What's a great way to get clicks right now? Well, Aaron Rodgers is a Jet, but he still has a huge following in Green Bay. And of course, everyone in New York, well, all Jets fans are thrilled he's here. So you've got a player with two fan bases who love the guy. So just go after that dude. And if half of each fan base clicks on it, you're going to get like a regular season audience type of numbers. But it really is just absolutely ridiculous. I don't. It's embarrassing that I'm assuming these are adults writing these articles. I didn't read them, but I'm assuming they're grown ups. And this is what they're doing. But and we have, I do try to remind myself sometimes because I've spoken to writers, um, in the past, Jets writers, who have told me about some of the pressure they've been under to write stories about stuff that even they think is ridiculous. But the
Mm-hmm.
the the editor, is saying no, this is what people want to read about. And the writer will plead their case, say, look, this isn't interesting. I don't the fans aren't, and the editors don't want to hear it. No. This is the story that people want, or this is what everyone's writing about. We have to be in there too. So, but these stories like this, I think, you got to have so little pride to entertain it that it's just kind of gross.
Yeah, I feel like from my perspective, at least when I think about writing for the site, I usually look over the whole topic and I'm like, does somebody actually want to read that? And sure, like you said, if you just throw Aaron Rodgers' name in the headline or the tagline, people are going to click on it. And we've kind of gotten to that point, especially on Twitter with these guys. It's like you just see Aaron Rodgers and it's either going to be negative or just like harping on something from the Packers beat. So you basically can only reply with like memes and gifs to these guys because you just can't take it serious. But yeah, when I sit down and go to write an article, and that's not what I would come up with. Daniel Jones is better than Aaron Rodgers, and New York needs to think about who's the better quarterback. And I understand, he's coming off a down year, whatever, 26 touchdowns. I don't think Daniel Jones broke 20 last year, and that's with the rushing. So I don't think, it's even
Didn't
holding
he have like 12? I forget.
it was in that range. I think 14 maybe. So like
Yeah.
it's not even a comparable, and this is compared to his other years where Daniel Jones wasn't good. And this was supposed to be that resurgence year with Brian Dable. And perhaps, this next upcoming season could be better for him. But I don't know. I thought it was silly. Just the whole, I didn't read it either, but just the headline, just to grab people's attention, I thought was just silly. I didn't even retweet it to like give it the time of day. I
Yeah,
was
he
like,
threw
I can't even.
15. He threw 15 touchdowns.
15 exact to 26, and I understand all the circumstances, but come on, that's a good year for Daniel Jones versus a bad year for Aaron Rodgers. That's silly. The Athletic article did a couple of headlines caught my eye, mainly on Twitter. I'm in the process of still reading it now. It's the communication one, about how the communication entering 2021 between Rodgers and Brian Gutekunst, their general manager, was not, it was improved somewhat, is what the article said. But then in quotes, it had a direct quote from Rodgers that said it still wasn't anywhere near the Jets in just a few short weeks. So that to me, I'll take that anytime we can, is that the Jets are doing something right, and a team like the Packers are looking at us like, whoa, we didn't do this with Rodgers, but now you guys are. So I think that's a great thing. Then the kind of scary thing, but I feel like if you listen to Rodgers in all of his Pat McAfee interviews and just the wording he's used at the end of his seasons the past 2 years, was that he didn't like Brian Gutekunst. And there was definitely some kind of rift there. And it proved it in the article flat out by saying Rodgers' agent, Dave Dunn, asked the Packers to either fire Brian Gutekunst or trade Aaron Rodgers. And this was going into the 2021 season. So this is a couple years removed, right after they just drafted Jordan Love, So that made me a little nervous. But then I think about it and I'm like, I don't think it's ever going to get to that point with the Joe Douglas and Aaron Rodgers, because I feel like that's a lot of Jets fans thinking is like, oh, he did it there, he might do it here if things go a little south. But those were the only two things that really stuck out to me, other than the fact of, like you said, it's just crying over what your exes are doing while you're home alone on a Friday night and they're out, enjoying their lives. So pretty high school to me, but I just wanted to start with that, something light. We do have a couple roster moves, small moves. One is a contract reworking. Safety Jordan Whitehead, who I believe was in discussions by a lot of fans to be either cut or reworked or dealt some way, somehow. Not many fans liked him after his first year in New York. I kind of sat the fence and said, I don't mind him as a player. He definitely didn't live up to the expectations or the contract, but they didn't make any moves at safety as well. So it's very hard to, only subtract from that room and not add anything. I believe Jarek Bernard-Converse is the only addition to that room if they do move him back to safety. Other than that, you lost LaMarcus Joyner, so you're not really doing much to that room. So to get rid of Whitehead, I thought was a little weird, but they do end up restructuring his contract. They free up $5.3 million, I believe it was specifically. They now have $24 million, and they have a short list of names that need to get paid still. Rodgers, Quinnen, Tippmann, and Will McDonald IV. So obviously they're going to still need to use that $24 million, and you want to go into the season with like $6 or $7 million in case of an emergency happens. So what were your thoughts on the re-signing? And then we also have the signing of Yadni Kajust from the Patriots, musical chairs in the offensive tackle room in the AFC. I believe Brandon Shell went from Miami to Buffalo. So everybody's just kind of swapping offensive tackles at this point. I thought they should have signed George Fant. Obviously, that's not the case. They signed Yadni Kajust and released Eric Smith. I think it's a bottom of the roster signing, camp kind of body signing anyway. But what are your thoughts on the two signings and possibly George Fant?
Well, with Whitehead, I think important to remember it's not a pay cut. Looks like they moved money around. And even they did add Chuck Clark, but they're really not the same type of player.
Right.
So you've added Clark to the room, but I don't think they didn't do enough to move on from Whitehead. I thought they might, even though a guy like Trey Dean has to be a top candidate to make the roster as a UDFA.
Mm-hmm.
And you got to think about Marquise Waters out of Texas Tech, who I've mentioned a few times as more of a versatile guy who might be able to play a few different spots. But in terms of established veteran depth, whether it's quality depth or not, Whitehead kind of had to stay. The freeing up of the money, at this point, again, you mentioned Tippmann and McDonald there, of course. They're the guys whose money is going to impact this year. Like
Yes.
Rodgers, you can see getting spread out. Quinnen it can be an extension that starts next year. So really, once you get those guys signed, and then give yourself that little bit of breathing room teams tend to like to work with during the year, the Jets really are looking at about 10 million in space right now, like real world space.
Mhm.
Because again, 24 on paper. The draft picks are going to cost them another 10 or so. They're going to want to have another 3 to 5 sitting around for in-season costs, and that leaves you with 9 or 10 million. But there are still more moves that can be made. We'll see what happens there. With Kajust, I don't. I mean, you talk about injury prone. I mean, he missed a year and a half in college. I actually did a draft profile on him as like I thought he might be a steal, and I said he might, because there were those who thought he could be, a second round pick. And I thought, well, with the injuries, you might get this guy in round 3. He might be a steal because I did like him. But he hasn't been very good. He's been, missed a year and a half due to injuries in college, missed his rookie year due to injuries, missed his second year due to injuries. So the guy can't stay on the field.
Mhm.
I commented on your fan thing. I would have preferred fan, but I kind of thought about it afterwards, and I was like, well, Kajus is probably signing for vet minimum, where fan's not going to break the bank, but he's probably going to want a few $1,000,000, based on his previous performance. And again, even though they have 24 million on paper, they don't really have that type of space to go out and add a third tackle, fourth tackle at this point. Even though he would be your third most likely. I just don't know that they have that kind of money to spend right now on a guy who's not a starter. But again, there will be more money freed up as if there are moves they want to make.
Yeah, and when I put that tweet out that you're alluding to, I did say if they felt iffy about any of their top 4 options, those options being Brown, Becton, Mitchell, and Carter Warren, the rookie. So I'm not saying, sign him for, a starter position, which I think a lot of people on Twitter took it for. But like you said, it's not going to be a vet minimum type of signing. It's going to be
Right.
probably like 3 to 6 million. I'm just ballparking with some incentives if he does become starter or has to play games as that insurance swing tackle. But yeah, I agree. If you could upgrade it, yeah, I would just take it if you could. But having could just come in as a vet minimum is probably the more cost effective option for them. The one stat I did see when they were talking about him on Twitter was he played 17 games in his career, and 10 of them were last season. And he's been in the league for a couple years. So, like you said, you just miss all those years with injuries, and it doesn't
And
look good.
his pressure rate allowed is like, 20%, something like just a crazy high number.
Yeah,
Again, very limited reps, but he's been beaten quite easily. So,
yeah, I,
um,
I I don't see. I like I said, can't body probably at most. Just a guy to get you through those rotations when guys are out. Dwayne Brown is still rehabbing. We'll talk about him in a little bit. Mekhi Becton is still rehabbing, but he's out there at practice. Then obviously you have Mitchell coming back from an injury, so they're not trying to put a full workload on him. Then you have a rookie, Carter Warren, and you also have, as Jonathan asked in the tweet or in the chat, is Warren better than Billy Turner right now? Right now, no. Billy Turner is probably better than Carter Warren. There might be like areas of his game where you could say he's equal to, and there could be upside for Carter Warren for sure to be better than Billy Turner. I hope he's better than Billy Turner long term. But right now, you got to say Billy Turner is probably your third, maybe second best tackle, depending just on how, you got to factor Rodgers into the whole equation. And I think I put Rodgers' impact into the title of the show because he's going to have an impact on personnel decisions. Not, to a T, everything is going to be what Rodgers says Rodgers gets. But if Rodgers has rapport going with Billy Turner and Mekhi Becton is a little questionable at right tackle, I think Rodgers is going to push to, get his guy Billy Turner in there as the starting right tackle. Not saying it's going to happen, but he's going to have influence on this team. And I think throughout the offense, CJ Uzama is another guy that comes to mind. I feel like he's another guy that Rodgers is getting close with that could see playing time over other guys. So that's just my case on it. How do you think Billy Turner stacks up against Carter Warren?
yeah, listen, I think right now, just based on experience, you have to give Billy Turner the nod, but I would not be one bit surprised if Carter Warren passes him in short order.
Yep.
Turner's just not that good. And Carter Warren does some things really well in pass pro. He said himself, I said when he was drafted, that I thought he was really good in pass pro, but he could use some work as a run blocker. I then heard him, I forget which interview it was, which organization or which outlet, but he did an interview, and when they asked him what's something, that's right. They said, what did the draft advisory board tell you last year, um, in terms of where you would go if you came out? And
Hmm.
the answer was, they said I needed to work on my run blocking and, to help my value. So, yeah, I think that's where he needs to get better. But Billy Turner is a sort of it's another move where you kind of you look at the numbers and you watch them on film and you just kind of scratch your head and go, they couldn't have got a better guy than this. But he's Aaron. Aaron wanted him, so Aaron gets him, and I I certainly hope that doesn't mean Aaron gets to start him, because he's not very good.
Yeah, I think if push came to shove, I would have probably liked George Fant over Billy Turner even. But
Yeah,
that's we're a ways down
Cam
the road
Fleming.
from
I
that.
kept mentioning Cam
Yes,
Fleming.
who just signed
Only
somewhere.
because
I forget where, but I
yeah,
think he did
he's
just sign a 1-year deal, so he
okay.
was there.
Yeah, he's a guy who
But
played both sides for this offense last year.
yep,
Played 15, 16 games. So
yep. And I know
I
Fant looked better at the left tackle position for the Jets when he played, but that doesn't mean he was awful at right tackle. Yeah, there were some moments, but like I said, just get a guy in there to compete. You have a deep room as it is, but we're gonna do our roster rankings at some point throughout the summer process, and I'm just trying to list them in my head, and I put them on paper the other day. And offensive tackle, because I'm splitting all the offensive line spots up because I think that's the most fair way to do it. Offensive tackle is like a bottom two group for me. And I've been saying this entire time, I'm so high on the offensive tackle group. I'm confident in guys like Dwayne Brown and Mekhi Becton to be the best versions of themselves, but they still graded out as a pretty poor group compared to the rest of the offense. So it does make you worry that, we can get into the season and barring injury, I mean, we could be a good offensive line, but it's really just, we got to see it to believe it first. All right, getting into the OTA pressers here. We had a couple players talk to the media. We had Saleh, Ulbrich, and Boyer. I hadn't listened to the Boyer one yet, but I listened to the Saleh and the Ulbrich one. Saleh gave us some answers I thought were pretty interesting, and Ulbrich gave us, a little tidbit of information that I think is going to shine a light, so to speak, on how the Jets are going to use their defense. First on offense, or not offense, but first with Robert Saleh, the offensive player he was talking about, Dwayne Brown. I know it was not, chronologically the first thing he talked about in the interview, but it's the number one thing that stuck with me from his interview. Talking about Dwayne Brown, the exact quote from Robert Saleh is, "You guys know I love Dwayne. He won the first annual Selfless Warrior Award for the team in terms of just what he sacrificed. That is the award that the Jets literally created for this guy. Like I said, last year, his money was guaranteed, didn't have to play it down, and his money was guaranteed, and he didn't have to subject his body to what he did. But he stepped out there, he stepped on the field, played as many games as he possibly could with the torn rotator cuffs, and did a really nice job. So he's going to fight for it. He doesn't believe he's entitled to anything. He believes he's got to earn everything, and there's a reason why he's played for so long and has had so much success. I mean, look at him. He's a brick house. He can still play as many years as he's willing to play." And then Dwayne Brown met with the media shortly after, and he talked about it as well. And he said, "I have plenty left in the tank." He said he's not sure if he'll be ready for training camp. He's going to leave it up to the doctors. But coming out of surgery immediately after the regular season, he knew he wanted to come back. His surgery went great, and he said he returned to this team because he wants to win, and that this is a team that wants to win and wants to be the best version of himself for that team. So I couple all that long thing together just to say, Dwayne Brown, left tackle, put it in Sharpie. I don't see how you can't cut it any other way. And I get it. Mekhi Becton is probably the more talented player, and we've preached best five on this podcast so many times. But when you look at the word best, it does not just mean his rating is higher on a Madden game than the others, so he has to be the starter. Or you can't look at it so binary like that. When they say best, that means most reliable, most talented. All these different factors come into it. The harder worker at practice, that definitely goes into who's going to be the starter. So to me, Dwayne Brown's your left tackle, Mekhi Becton's your right tackle if he wins the job. And you hope that if he's on the team next year, he's your left tackle in 2024. Is that what you got from that?
Yeah, well, listen, it's really it's best for the team is what it is in my
Mhm.
mind. Like it's best five for the team to win. And I said this after Makai's comments, which I thought were not in his best interest. That I said he has to understand that even if he does go out there and outplay Dwayne Brown, that's fine. But if both of them are in the top five, only one of them plays both spots. So
Yep.
guess who's going to move? You're not moving Dwayne Brown at 37, 38 years old. So Mekhi Becton may very well go out there and prove himself to be the better left tackle. He might do a better job in practice and in games. But at the end of the day, if Robert Saleh decides Brown and Becton are two of my best guys, so they're both starting, then Becton's going to right tackle, and that's it. And I thought some of the comments from Saleh, definitely felt directed at Becton. And when he explained, Dwayne Brown doesn't feel entitled, he doesn't feel anything has to be handed to him, and he understands he has to work for it. This having just said Mekhi Becton's got to work for it. And then he
Hmm.
says Dwayne's not entitled. He understands he has to work for it. So only one of these guys had to be told they have to work for it. The other one didn't have to be told because he's not entitled. So I mean, it was a veiled shot at Becton, and it's Salah's right to say that it's going to be the best five, and if it is, Becton probably plays right tackle. And as we've agreed, and then next year you hope he plays well enough that Becton is back, and then he's your left tackle, and you move on.
Yeah, and Robert Saleh used a term that I want to get into in just a second, and I think Dwayne Brown fits into that bucket. But per Rich Samini on Twitter, when he was at practice, I believe this was 2 days ago, he said Joe Tippmann getting reps at guard, McGovern with starting O. Now they're not allowed to say this guy was the starting center and this guy was the number 2 right guard or whatever. So McGovern was with the starting O. AVT was not out there, so Wes Schweitzer was the right guard. And then Adam Pankey and Max Mitchell were your offensive tackles. So that obviously they're just using bodies where they have them while their main guys are out. But I do think it is cool that they are getting Joe Tippmann reps at guard when they easily could have just said, okay, McGovern get reps at guard. I like that they're letting Joe Tippmann get those reps because in a pinch, you never know. He could have to go into the guard position. Obviously, grain of salt, it's a May tweet when they're just wearing helmets and shorts. But I do like that they're going to get him a little bit more versatility. We obviously don't know where Joe Tippmann's going to land. Another, position that Rodgers' impact does come into play here. If he relies on Connor McGovern and he trusts him to be his, guy that calls the protections out or whatever he does, then that's going to be the guy. But if it's Joe Tippmann and Rodgers has a nice rapport with him, it's going to be Tippmann. So I think that's another position. But what are your thoughts on Tippmann getting to guard?
I think it's one of those things. It's sort of why not? Let's take a peek at him there. Nobody's hitting, so it doesn't matter. They could have you and me at guard. It's not going to impact anything. There's no full contact out there. I do worry. I mean, listen, sometimes coaches get it wrong, right? Maybe he's good enough to play guard, but the fact that he, when you read his bio prior to the draft, and then he said himself in his post-draft interview, they had him work a lot at guard at Wisconsin in practice, but they never put him there in a game. So it's
Mm-hmm.
like, was this like, were they throwing him in at guard when it didn't matter that it wouldn't hurt anyone, but as soon as it
Yeah.
counted, he never saw guard.
Yeah.
We'll find
Did they
out, and
not
this could
feel
be the same
confident?
thing.
Yeah.
Right. I listen, I'm not going to say I watched every Wisconsin game and I know what the depth chart looked like, but you would
Mm-hmm.
imagine at some point in his time there, a guard missed action. And they didn't feel the need to plug him in there. And look, maybe the backup center was an issue. I don't know. I just know that he never played there. And the Jets, this is the time of this is the time of year to experiment with that kind of stuff and just see how it got. Even though guys aren't hitting, get an idea for how well they move, get an idea for how well he picks up the offense from multiple positions, kind of test him in that sense. So not a huge thing because no one's gonna he's not gonna get beat and give up an Aaron Rodgers sack.
Mm-hmm.
But and no harm in taking a look at him there. I love versatility, man. Work guys in everywhere
Yep.
and see if somebody surprises you. And now you've just made your roster that much deeper.
Yeah, exactly. And I know the timing of our podcast is really, unfortunate for the, releasing of the Jet 20 or the Flight 21, 23, excuse me, Ascension videos that they've been putting out on YouTube every Thursday, 2 minutes after we get off the show. But last week's was the draft episode, and they talked about Tippmann specifically, obviously, and where he stacked up compared to other guys like Cody Mauch and John Michael Schmitz. And at one point, somebody says off camera, so you don't see who, that Joe Tippmann was the top center in their model. I don't know what goes into their model. I assume being at the top of anything is good, but the fact that they said top center makes me think, hey, maybe they look at him as a true center. So to actually see him getting that use at guard, I'm really happy, because say he doesn't win the starting center job, there's not many teams in the league that carry a true center only backup. That backup needs to have versatility. And I feel like the Eagles got away with it because their roster is just so complete with Cam Jurgens, who we liked out of Nebraska. They kind of just sat him beside Kelsey and just were like, you know what, we have Landon Dickerson who could play guard too, so we're okay. And they rumored putting him out to guard now that Salamalu is gone, and he was like, I'm a center. So like it's one of those things where if you're a center and you're a true center, it's very hard to stay as a backup. So Tippmann's going to need that flexibility at guard, but definitely top center in the model is a good thing to hear. I also wanted to mention Will McDonald was their consensus edge amongst the scouts in that room. It seemed like when Joe Douglas, was asking around, it seemed like it was Will McDonald, Michael Mayer, Broderick Jones from a scout's perspective. But it seemed like that was the consensus, that McDonald was higher than most of those guys that fans thought from the outside were definitely higher than Will McDonald. I feel like Will McDonald jumped up a good 20 spots in the draft based on where people thought he was going to go. So any thoughts on that real quick before we jump into the next part of the takeaway from the presser?
Yeah, I'll tell you what, and as much as I love Tippmann, and I'd said for a while before the draft he was my top guy, I was surprised to hear some of the names in that, take flight, Zay Flowers, Jordan Addison,
Yeah.
And they're like Tippmann. I was like, wow. Like I like Tippmann, but I love
I like
Addison too.
Addison. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Zay Flowers too. I probably didn't talk about him as much this year as I did last year. Probably, and really, I don't know that I talked about Zay Flowers a ton last year, but I watched a lot of him and I liked him.
Mhm.
I thought he would be a really good player. So it's like, that's this stuff. It's fun to watch, but those are the kind of things that come back to bite you. If teams don't often put that out in public. We like this player more than that player. Well,
Yeah.
if those guys go on to be studs and your guy isn't, everyone's gonna be like, "Huh, everyone in your damn room had the guy you took over these guys who were better," and it's a bad
Mhm.
look. But I'm not saying that's gonna happen. It's the Jets really putting themselves out there, but I love it, man. I love the behind the scenes talk. Of course, trying to
Mhm.
guess who they're talking about as they're describing guys.
Every
Hall of
time.
Famer who's got to stay out of his own way, and you're like Jalen Carter. It's got to be Jalen Carter. Um,
Yes, thank you.
yeah.
Yep.
And there were a couple more. Some of them are kind of vague, and you're like, that could be 10 different guys. But
The negative ones really get you thinking, like, who the hell could that be? Is it somebody that I talked
oh,
about
you
in
know
a
who I
good
was
way,
thinking? You know what? When somebody they said bad work habits, I was thinking who was it? The Georgia tackle, who ended up going super
Ohio
late.
State, DeJuan
Oh yeah,
Jones.
Ohio State, yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
because I told you about the Spielman podcast,
And
the
the
Rick
Senior
Spielman
Bowl
pod,
thing and
where
everything.
he
Yep.
said like, he stood out to him in his pro day for being too chilled out. Like, the other Ohio State linemen were busting their tails, doing extra work off to the side, and he was just standing there watching. And then he, won practice of the Senior Bowl and went home. And
Mhm.
people were telling him he's got problems controlling what he eats, and so when I started hearing all that, I was like, oh, I wonder if that's who, like, he fits that description. That's everything Spielman said. So yeah, it's fun. I do think it's interesting. And I'm not saying they didn't want Will McDonald, but there was a lot more. They had a whole lot more audio on everyone signing off on Tippmann than they did on McDonald. They had like these
That's true.
minutes of Tippmann.
Yes.
And then with McDonald, it's like, like the clip that you referenced where Joe Douglas said, "Who do we got?" And it was McDonald, Mayer, Jones. I went back and I'm like that to me. I initially thought that, and I even tweeted out. I was like, "Oh well, there you go. He was their top guy." And then I went back and watched it, and I'm like, he could have been asking one scout. That might have been one
Yes.
guy's list. Although Scott Mason, Play Like a Jet, had the producer of the series on, and he said no, that was the consensus list.
Oh, okay. Because I
Which
was going to say there's
which
only one person who I would have thought, and if it was that person's voice, John Carr, the director of college scouting, if you
right,
could tell that it was his voice, I would have
right.
been like, okay, that's the consensus. Because up with Joe Douglas, that's kind of like the next in line. I know Rex Hogan is the assistant GM, but John Carr is like the guy with the director of college scouting and that whole process. So he's usually the first one Joe Douglas looked at in the videos, but for that specific one, you couldn't tell. But
Right.
yes, I agreed. It was until I knew who it was more of just a scout perspective until the consensus was in.
Yeah, yeah. I think we'll my whole thing was whether it was the consensus list or not, like just the fact that there was a scout in the room that had him as their top guy tells us he would have been in the conversation. And the fact
Yes.
he's in the conversation means he could have been the pick, So the fact that the Jets panicked and he was a reach and they didn't know what to do, that kind of takes that myth and throws it out the window.
Hmm.
Heidi in the chat here says Billy Turner was brought in more because of Hackett. That's what Salah said. Salah
Hmm.
says a lot of things. Coaches say a lot of things. They that aren't necessarily true. They said there was like, oh, there's a Rodgers list, and then the Jets are like, no, there's not, and then the Jets are like, well, there is, but that's okay. So it's like, well, which was it? First you said there was
Hmm.
no list. Now you're saying there is a list, and it's okay, and it is okay that there's a list. I don't disagree with that. I thought it was weird in the first place to pretend there wasn't one, but
Right. I think
you
there's a
know,
portion of Hackett, Rodgers, everybody. If they're going to sign a guy
I'm,
like
I'm
that,
not saying I'm
everybody's
not
signed,
saying
of
Hackett doesn't have
course.
input,
Yeah, I think
but
it's definitely closer to a 50-50 thing and not a oh Rogers wanted him so let's go get him type of thing. But yeah, I agree. It's got to be probably more 50-50.
yeah, yeah, no problem there, Hyder. It's hard to keep up, but yeah, I think he did. I think everyone probably had a voice and everyone signed off on it, but Rogers has spoken highly of Turner, and I think he's got the biggest voice in the room right now.
Yeah, he definitely has spoken highly of him. All right, getting to the next presser was defensive coordinator Jeff Ulbrich. Let me get my right notes out here. And he talked about. Oh no, I'm sorry, I skipped the line. I wanted to talk about the quote or the phrase that Saleh used to describe a couple of players on the team. When talking about Randall Cobb, he used a phrase "flag bearers," and what he meant by that are guys who are going to plant the flag and be able to echo the messaging. They already know what it is. To have those guys is priceless. No different than why we brought Solomon, Quan a year ago, Marcel Harris, DJ Reed, all the guys who have had familiarity with our system and our messaging and our voice. And I can, he didn't name Dwayne Brown specifically, but that's what I was trying to get back to was I think Dwayne Brown fits in that list as well. Dwayne Brown's somebody that's going to go out there and motivate the younger guys. He's in his 17th season. Him and Rodgers are like the oldest tackle quarterback combination in the league. If they both start week one health, that'd be the oldest combination. So I think you could put him into that category of a flag bearer. But I thought it was interesting that he mentioned it when talking about Randall Cobb, a player who has not been with the team very long, but is a veteran and knows the system, and Saleh understands that. But did you think of any players like when you heard the term flag bearers for this team, maybe that he didn't name? Thomas, Quan, Marcel, DJ Reed, anybody else that comes to your mind when you hear that term?
Funny when I heard the term, my first thought was because it is, there's military terms, flag bearers or guidon
Oh,
bearers,
okay.
guys who carry the flags. And with his Navy SEALs references last year, I was like, I think he's a military guy.
Gotta be.
I think, yeah, Salah wants all these references to toughness and military. We saw some of the pictures of them doing the Navy SEAL stuff, carrying the logs around
Yep.
the practice field. So I think Salah's really big into that. Yeah, and look, Randall Cobb, I'm not gonna lie, I keep forgetting he's on the roster. I really do.
Yeah.
Every time I think of receivers, I'm thinking of big play guys down the field, and Cobb to me again just has that feel of yeah, he's a guy Rodgers wanted. Um, he's that slot guy because I keep thinking Lazard's going to see a lot of the slot. People don't
Yep.
talk about that a whole lot, but he's played a fair number of reps there, and I think by having Lazard in the slot and Davis and Wilson on the outside, that's probably the best trio the Jets have. Um, so how much Cobb plays, we'll see. I don't know how much he's got left in the tank. He's not really had a big year in some time, but we'll see where that goes. My preference would have been for a more explosive playmaker, but there is something to be said for chemistry and vet presence and the value he can bring. And I think that's what Salah's alluding to same as Alan Lazard right now, right? That in the huddle, on the field, in the locker room, when guys have questions about the offense, they can go to either of those two. You've got, with Rodgers and those two receivers, you have two guys who know the offense inside and out. So that's an ideal situation. In terms of that. But one thing, Dylan, I wasn't sure if you were going to touch on or not before we move on from Salah was the DeAndre Hopkins comments, which
Yeah,
really.
yeah. I was gonna say the guy that I was gonna say is my flag bearer was Corey Davis, and that ties into the DeAndre Hopkins thing because I feel like Corey Davis, every time they talk about him, he does the right things. He shows up to practice. He works
Right.
hard. Obviously, he's not always available health wise, and yes, there were some drops in inopportune times. But I did think that he was somebody that was, based on the way they talk about him, deserved of possibly being in that bucket of a flag bearer. So I was a little shocked when he said, we love our receiver room. We're pretty much putting to bed any DeAndre Hopkins rumors. But I did like that he came out and said that all about Corey Davis, because if they are going to stick with him, I like that they're, going full bore with Corey Davis instead.
Yeah, it's confusing to me, and it's even more confusing. It's funny because I had this discussion with somebody recently about a non-football topic, and actually football too. In discussing, who was it? We were talking about Hopkins versus Davis, and somebody just said, and someone who was saying, they shouldn't go after Hopkins was like, well, if you just put the drops aside, it's not a huge difference. And I'm like, well, first of all, there still is, and second of all, why would you put the drops aside? That's an important thing.
Yeah.
And then the guy was like, I did say, I said something like, how do you not take drops into account? And he was
Yeah.
like, I did. I said if you put them aside. I'm like, yeah, that means not taking them into account. Like
Right.
that's the definition. You're saying let's ignore this thing as we discuss this topic. And that's what Salah did. Like, I know we went after Odell and all that, but we love our room. We're not going to add any receivers. We love our room. But you just tried to add Odell, and you
Yep.
haven't added or subtracted anyone in that time. Same exact room. But you tried to sign Odell Beckham coming off two blown out ACLs. It baffles my mind that you would go. Listen, unless, and I discussed this today. I did another mailbag with Scott. We do a ton of those now. Um, Scott play like a jet, and I said, what did I say? I've lost my train of thought now. With the
About the,
yeah, sorry.
I was just gonna say about the receivers.
Yeah, what the hell was I saying? I cut myself off and to say that I
Oh, just
discussed it
like
with
Corey
Scott.
Davis versus DeAndre Hopkins, and not wanting to upgrade the room, even though we just had OBJ in for the
Yeah,
meeting and everything.
yeah. That the to say, and whoever asked the question asked it brilliantly. I think it was Connor Hughes. He said like, what's the situation? You guys just went after Odell. Oh, that's it was Odell that I couldn't remember what I was saying.
Oh, okay.
I'm an idiot. I'm gonna blame it on the cold. Got a brain fog. But yeah, part of me is wondering, were they really just going to make Odell like an offer to say they made him an offer because he's a guy Rodgers wanted? Like maybe the interest wasn't
Hmm.
real. And they were going to say, look, we know Odell's going to want at least 11. Let's offer him 7.5 and he'll go somewhere else. But it never even got to that point because Baltimore made him a ridiculous offer before he got to the Jets. So the Jets didn't have to do it. Maybe that was the case. I don't know. But if we're going to take the Jets, if we're going to take all the reported interest and Salah acknowledging the interest, and he was coming in for a physical, so that wasn't like a made up thing.
Right.
What the level of interest was, we don't know. What the offer was going to be, we don't know. But it's very weird to me to say we were going to make an offer to a guy with two blown out ACLs, but we won't offer DeAndre Hopkins because we like our receiver room. It makes no sense. Hopkins is an absolute upgrade. And that was the drop rate that I mentioned, Dylan. I don't know if you saw I tweeted it. He averaged what was I know they added Cobb, Jonathan, but to me he's not he's going to be a 350 400 yard guy. Like, and he's a slot guy. These guys are boundary guys.
Yeah.
Cobb doesn't change whether or not you
A
go after Hopkins,
significant
at least in
add.
my mind. Yeah.
Hmm.
They basically play different positions, even though they're all receivers. But I think that the Hopkins averages a drop every 80 targets, and
Oh
Corey
wow.
Davis averages a drop every 16. So I mean, they're miles apart. And if you look at the numbers Hopkins put up last year, I mean, Hopkins has 4 drops in the last 3 seasons. 1 last year, 2 the year before that, and 1 the year before that. That's insane.
Hmm.
So, and Hopkins, if you look at the numbers he put up last year with bad quarterbacks, Kyler Murray missed a lot of time last year, and he was playing with his backup quarterbacks. And he's a guy who put up 80 yards a game. You extrapolate that over a full season, that's a 1,500-yard season.
Hmm.
And I have people telling me he's not a big enough upgrade over Corey Davis. Like, come on, man, give me a break. And as Jonathan says, um, well, I don't know that Hopkins is a bad locker room guy. A lot of teams have paid him a lot of money, and I'm going to guess someone else is about to do the same. So those teams don't seem to mind. I just think we've talked about it, man. It's a very small window. And if you're going to create a very small window and then kind of go all in, like, we're not going to go all in. We're going to go mostly in.
Right.
I don't understand it. I look at some of the things they're doing and I'm excited. Like this is going to be the most fun season we've had in years. You know, keeping our fingers crossed that everyone stays healthy. But a lot of what they're doing screams, half effort. There's still time to
Hmm.
add a second quarterback. Maybe they get DeAndre Hopkins, but I think there are still some things they could do to give themselves a much better chance that it looks like they're not doing, but we'll see.
Yeah, the way it all looks from the outside of going after Odell or potentially going after Odell, and I know there's rumors all over the map of what the deal looked like or the offer looked like from the Jets to Odell compared to what the Ravens actually gave Odell. So you could say that the Jets really weren't interested if you believe some of the rumors on what the offer was, but I think that there had to have been some general interest in him bringing him onto the team. So it is weird that they're not going to take on DeAndre Hopkins. And it's weird because I feel like the narrative about DeAndre Hopkins when he was still a member of the Cardinals was that he's still worthy of, being a top wide receiver, a number 2 wide receiver for somebody. And then he gets released by the Cardinals. They eat all the money assigned to him, and now you see, oh, he's slow, he doesn't separate as much, he's really just like a downfield guy who's going to win 50-50 balls sometimes and like not really going to give you much in the run game. So then you look at Corey Davis and you compare him to Davis, and yeah, you said it, if you want a receiver, DeAndre Hopkins is way above Corey Davis as a receiver. Then you factor in every single thing that they want the wide receivers to do, run blocking. And I know that was a comment about Alan Lazard and his run blocking is like Corey Davis is better than DeAndre Hopkins as a run blocker. So there are pieces of his game where he's going to be more physical, this and that. But when you're going to just upgrade the room, DeAndre Hopkins is the guy to upgrade it with over a Corey Davis. So I agree. Don't just dip your toe in the going all in, experience with Aaron Rodgers, so to speak. Just dive headfirst into it and get the guys and figure it out later. But clearly there's some kind of reservation that fans on Twitter and, people like us are seeing with Hopkins and what NFL teams are seeing with Hopkins. So I think that's going to be one of the most interesting free agent follows throughout the summer because he might not sign right away because there are a lot of questions, and we'll see where he ends up. I would love him on the Jets, even with Corey Davis, but I don't think you could have both. But I do think it's certainly an upgrade. You're muted, by the way. But he's certainly an upgrade over Corey Davis. I agree.
Yeah, and it looks like there are several teams interested, and some of them have to clear cap if they want to bring him in.
Yes.
Kansas City's got less than 1 million, Buffalo's got 1,500,000,
Mm-hmm.
so there are guys that could go that. Yeah, and Hater says, interesting they had Tippmann over Addison and Zay Flowers, which we
Yep.
talked about a minute
You
ago.
touched about it. Yep.
Yeah, that really was surprising, but yeah, I don't get it. I'm confused by and you know it's that the thing that we've talked about in the past and fans do it so much today is letting perfect be the enemy of good. Like, oh, I can find a flaw in this guy, so they shouldn't get him. Like, everyone's got a flaw.
Yep.
He's just a better receiver. Blocking is nice, but that's kind of a gravy thing. That's like, it's great to have. You love to have it. It's a big part of big runs when receivers are blocking downfield. But you don't take a guy who could potentially be a 1,500 yard guy and not sign him because you have an 800-yard guy who's a better blocker.
Mm-hmm.
And look, maybe Corey Davis gets you 1,000. I'm a big Corey Davis guy. I've
Yeah.
been one of the people defending him for a couple of years. As people have been saying, cut him, he's garbage, he's trash. Like, I don't feel that way about him. If he stays
Mm-hmm.
around, I'm absolutely fine with that. I said all offseason while people were saying he was a lock to get cut, I was saying don't bank on it. He can hang around. So I'm not a Corey Davis hater or an anti-Davis guy. I like them. I just think Hopkins is the better option, and I think they have this small window and they should be taking advantage of it.
Yeah, I definitely agree there. All right, now we can pivot to the Jeff Ulbrich press conference. I really only just had one immediate takeaway, a secondary takeaway kind of as well. But my main takeaway was when he talked about the defensive line versatility, and he talked about how JFM and Michael Clemens can now be moved more inside, or they're going to at least experiment moving them more inside. Obviously, we've seen JFM; he's been the tweener on the roster for the last couple of years. But last year in the preseason, we saw Michael Clemens and Tenzel Smart in this on the interior in the second half of those football games, and I want to say 6-7 pressures average between the two of them each game when they were just wreaking havoc against backup guards and centers in the preseason. So I thought that that was always something that the Jets were going to explore more. They obviously didn't do it in his rookie season. They had more depth at the defensive tackle position last year than they do this year, at least on paper. I know you added Quentin Jefferson and Al Woods, but I don't think either of them are a Sheldon Rankins type of guy. Maybe together they can kind of be. So you're going to need to move bodies around. He did also mention that Clemens is at 290 pounds, which I believe you said is 27 pounds more than he weighed last season. So from two,
It's 27 more than he was at the combine.
okay,
It's 20 more than he was listed at last year. He was listed at 270. He showed up at Indy at 263. So he's
okay.
27 pounds up from Indy, 20 pounds up from last season.
So he's certainly getting on that year two meal plan that the New York Jets and the, their staff have gone and gotten in place for him. He looks it like when they put the picture out on their Twitter of him and McDonald and Jermaine next to each other. He didn't look like an edge guy. He looked like an interior guy. And
Yep.
in his interviews, when he's just staring at you mean faced, he's an interior guy. Like you don't want that coming right up the gut from the A gap, B gap. So I'm really excited for it, actually. I think it's really going to take some pressure off that defensive tackle rotation. You're not going to need to see as much Solomon Thomas. Al Woods is 36 or 37. So, he's aging. He's not going to be your 3-down player. Plus, he's a run stuffer. But Clemens gives you both. At Texas A&M, he did well rushing the passer and against the run, I felt, just because of his, I don't know, his demeanor when he steps on the football field. I guess that's like the easiest way to say it is he's just like not going to fail. And whoever's across from him, like you better come prepared because I feel like Michael Clemens is ready to take anybody's head off. So I'm excited to see the change. What do you think about this new versatility that they're going to explore?
Yeah, I'm pumped about it. I love it. I think we've talked about how we thought maybe they would add another D lineman in the draft, but I guess in their mind they kind of had because they were going to have him bulk up. I'm sure that's something they talked about with him during the year and going into the offseason. Like, hey, we want you to put on some weight. You're going to play the interior a little bit. I think Ulbrich said we're going to see more of John Franklin Myers inside. Franklin Myers, I think, is a really, we know he's a good player, but I don't think he gets enough attention for how good he is. Like John Franklin Myers can be a difference maker. So, the more I think about it, I feel like this interior, by saying Clemens and JFM are going to get some heavy rotation at DT with what we've seen from Jefferson. If you look at a Seattle film, Al Woods is the space eater, the guy who's going to take up blocks and let guys run free or just manhandle guys and walk
Mm-hmm.
guys into the backfield. Great. I think his run stuff, his run blocking or run defense grade last year dipped a little if you look at PFF, but the previous couple of years he's graded out really high. You watch him on film, he looks like he's tossing guys around. So this group is so deep, man. If Clemens is as good as we hope, and Clemens I think is better against the run than he is against the pass, so moving him inside and just those long limbs. Get that guy up the middle with those long arms and let him eat. And I think that he can be an impactful player there. So and oh, by the way, Quinnen Williams. So they've got some talent on that interior D line, and then of course with the edges with Lawson and McDonald and Huff and JJ. Like I said, I was thinking about this group today, man. I was getting pumped. I was like, this is a group we haven't really talked about because there wasn't a Clemens to talk about. You thought maybe JFM would see some more action inside, but until you actually hear them say that's the plan, it's like, damn, that's like this group can be really, really good, especially when you look at the trio of corners. as good as, probably better than any other trio in the NFL. Guys are going to have time to get to the quarterback, and they're going to have a lot of guys who are both talented and very fresh with how often they're able to rotate out. It does make me wonder about Solomon Thomas. Like, I think he's probably, in my mind, like the low man on the totem pole.
Yes.
Um, does he hang around? I don't know. I mean, you look at he wasn't all that great on film. He wasn't the numbers bear that out. So we'll see what happens there. And
Yeah. Oops, sorry.
no, that's fine. I would love to. Like, I've been a Tanzel Smart guy for a couple years now.
Yep.
Ever since his camp a couple seasons ago, he was fantastic. He was very good again last year. I like Deslin Alexander, the UDFA out of Pitt. I'd love to see him find a way to stick. So, but now we're talking about guys, sixth and seventh on the depth chart. But in terms of that top 5 or 6, this group can be really special and make life living hell for quarterbacks.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm like trying to write down all these possibilities for the defensive line combination, and I forgot Bryce Huff in all of this. And I'm like, shoot, like one of our best pass rushers from last year is just so crazy. You go through all these combinations, but you mentioned Solomon Thomas not hopefully seeing the field too much, and I hope that they kind of look at him as this year's version of Vinny Curry. He's a veteran guy. He knows what to do if you need him out there, but let's put the young guys ahead of him on the depth chart, and hopefully we can make the best out of it. But yeah, you look at your base 4 down front. You look at Carl Lawson, Quinnen Williams. We're going to put Al Woods there as the early down role, the run stuffer, with John Franklin Myers on the edge. And they do the NASCAR package in the NFL, which is usually just 4 edge rushers that are playing on your 4 down front. And if you consider JFM an edge with Michael Clemens, you could have Will McDonald, JFM, Michael Clemens, Jermaine Johnson in that speed NASCAR package, and you really have 4 edge rushers out there doing things, just wreaking havoc. So I think that, like I said, I didn't even mention Bryce Huff. You could throw him into that rotation as well. So it's certainly going to be a deep defensive line group. And like you said, you have the corners that are going to stop them on the back end. Every quarterback's time to throw can't be, under 1.6 seconds or whatever it is. They can't do that every time. And the Jets are going to take advantage when they hold on to the ball.
Especially now that the Jets, are going to be able to score points. Like, that's a big difference.
Exactly. When you're down 10 points in the third, you can't just run it and feel safe.
Exactly. When the game is always close or you're always playing from behind, teams can keep throwing it in 1.5 seconds because they don't need those big chunk plays. They're just trying to chew up clock and run it down and go home with the win. So, there's a lot to be excited about here. And I think the way the Jets are built, again, they're far from perfect. They have some things they need to work on, but they have a lot of things in place that make this an exciting team.
It's really funny watching the comments because Hader Ali is behind, like he mentioned, and he just said NASCAR package as we're talking about it. So he's already thinking about it as we're talking about it, which is perfect. My secondary comment from Ulbrich was about Sauce, actually, and it wasn't really a performance-based question, but it was, putting a challenge on his plate, so to speak, and that's getting the turnovers. That he said, he's exceptional with the pass breakups, and he hasn't seen that mental drop-off from, I'm a rookie, I won defensive rookie of the year, excuse me. I won all the accolades. I can, do my media runs from Super Bowl to draft, and everybody can love me in the media, and I'm cool. I can just do what I need to do. But he said that he's not taking that approach. He's taking the what can I do next approach. So I love that he mentioned that, he's just not going to settle. And I feel like when you're a cornerback, it's easy to settle and get taken advantage of. It's a very vulnerable position on that, boundary area there for Sauce. So I'm glad that it seems like mentally he's in the right place. He wants to win MVP, and he didn't get a defensive player of the year vote, but I think he won unanimously in the defensive rookie of the year. But either way, it's just, I liked that he isn't settling. I feel like Garrett Wilson's the same type of mentality. He's not going to settle. He just wants to keep going and get more. So although the defense was ranked 4th last year after 32nd the year before, and when asked about improvement, it's kind of hard to, put a number on it, like, oh, now we got to be number 1. But he said if we're going to, take that next step, turnovers is what's going to be. So I would love to see Sauce get like 4 or 5 takeaways this year. I think that'd be clutch for him. But what were your thoughts kind of subliminally about, challenging those takeaways from the defense?
Well, first touch on the on Sauce's mentality. I don't know. Did you watch his doc on YouTube
Yeah,
yet?
when he went back
Yeah.
to Detroit and everything. Yep.
I know. Listen, I know coaches blow a lot of smoke and they say a lot of nice things about their players because they're their players and they're gonna, whatever.
Sure.
But one thing that really stood out to me that I've heard Robert Saleh say about Sauce, and it was so clear in that documentary. He said, Sauce is an old soul, and he really is. Like his maturity level is so far beyond what you would
Yep.
expect from a kid that age, and it's refreshing. And I'm not just listen. Fans do it too, right? We find ways to gush about our young players, especially great young players who just went all pro and all all the accolades. These guys, we put them in these on these pedestals where they walk on water, and everything we say about them is wonderful. Um, but he really just some of the things he was saying in that documentary were really kind of gave you a glimpse into how mature he is. Some of it was, I mean, honestly, some of it was funny. For an old guy like me, like when you're my age, what, 46, 47, and you're watching like however old Sauce is, 2021,
Hmm.
you're seeing him go back to his neighborhood where he went to high school. He's like, oh, I haven't been back here in so long. Like, I'm doing the math and I'm like, 2, 3 years? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
so long. Like,
Hasn't been that long.
you
Yeah.
just got out of college, dude. Like, I
Mhm.
get where he's coming from, but and when you're that young, it probably does feel like a long time. When you're a million like me and you've lived in 1,000 different places, not being somewhere for a couple of years isn't like you don't get reminiscent about it. It's like 2 years ago is yesterday. So that did kind of make me laugh, but that's just an age thing. But so much of what he said, I will say, I didn't like that he told like 70 dudes that they could all go to the NFL. Every one of y'all can make it to the NFL. I'm like, dude, 70 out of 70 guys aren't going to the NFL. Like, I know what he's saying,
Right.
but I was like, you're sending the wrong message. Like, they're all going to walk out like, sweet, we're all going to the league. No, you're
Yeah,
not. You're
exactly.
not.
Yes. Yeah.
So that is maybe the one thing I wouldn't have advised he say. But in all seriousness, though, just a great job by him. And Salah nailed it, man. Old soul, and he really does have this sort of air about him, about like just the having his head on straight, not drinking, not smoking, not doing any of this stuff.
Yep.
For a young guy is just in an era and a generation where guys just want to be on their socials, out partying, doing wild stuff, which fine, that's their prerogative. But like
Hmm.
always give me the guy who would rather be, in his room playing video games or working out or looking at the playbook than he would, going out to party. That sort of that's it's the example I always use is the Peyton Manning, Ryan Leaf, right? Like those guys got drafted and the Colts asked each guy, when we draft you, what are you going to do? Peyton Manning said, I'm going to tell you to get me a copy of the playbook, start working. And Ryan Leaf was like, I'm going to get on a plane with my best friends and go to Vegas and party. And they're like, well, you just made the decision for us.
Wow.
Remember when Johnny Manziel got drafted, right? Oh, look how cool it is. Oh, I'm gonna send a tweet of me reading my playbook on the plane on my way to party to show how hardworking I am. Like, you think that playbook didn't go right back in his backpack as soon as he took that picture? That dude
Right.
wasn't working, you know. So that stuff scares teams off, but you got to love Sauce. Yeah, get the takeaways. They're going to come in time. I mean, they may get tougher because teams are eventually going to have to stop challenging him. But if DJ Reed keeps playing the way he is, you got to throw it somewhere, and they can both play. So he might get his opportunities.
Yeah, it's crazy. You mentioned the age thing, and I just turned 28, but I'm coming up on my 10-year high school reunion. So to hear somebody his age say, "Oh, like it's been a while since I've been back," like to me, it still feels like it's been a couple years, like 2 or 3 years since I've been out of high school. So it is kind of crazy. Not only do I wish I had the money that Sauce does at his age, but I do wish I had the maturity that Sauce has at his age, because I think a lot of people could learn from the examples that he sets, from the way he carries himself, because that's very important in today's world. Yeah, you kind of lied to the kids and made them dream big, and they probably walked out of there thinking they could be NFL guys, and most of them won't be. But
I,
he's
I
kind
think
of just
I think
going.
he's just insanely optimistic. I don't think he even thinks
Yes,
he was lying.
that's
Like, I think he
exactly it.
believes what he said.
Yep. If
And I
you
was
put in
like,
the work like he did, and you do that same path that he took,
yeah.
clean edge, no drugs, no drinking, no nothing, like you can make it. And I think that
And if
everybody
you
has
also
that piece
happen to
of
have
him.
75-inch wingspan and run a 4.3, like I get it, but there are some
Yeah.
things you have that most humans don't, and that's why you're
Right.
special. If his arms were as long as mine, he wouldn't be in the NFL right now. There's certain attributes you've got to have to get there. But yeah, listen, especially like I said, man, in today's game where There's so much negativity, and so many guys, young and old, are like 100% all about themselves. It's good to see someone so young already wanting, thinking in a way like, how can I give back? How can I be a role model? Doing this short documentary about coming from a rough neighborhood, which a million guys in the NFL do.
Sure.
But to kind of put a spotlight on it and highlight the people who helped you get out, and hear their perspective on the way he worked and the way his mind worked at a very young age. I thought it was. I'm not gonna lie to you, honestly. When I first heard like, oh, Sauce has a documentary coming out, I went, oh boy, like what is this gonna be? I because of today's player, I thought, is this going to be like an hour of how awesome I am? Which I
Oh,
was
okay.
like,
Yeah.
I don't see Sauce being that kind of guy, but we don't normally see mature type videos. Like normally we don't see guys make documentaries after 1 year. You know
That's
what I
true.
mean? Which that was like, I was like, what's this going to be? Like, I hope this isn't a big, like, hey, look at me. And look, not that he wouldn't be entitled to do it, but again, I thought it would have been out of character for him. So then to sit down and watch it and go, oh, this is him being him. Like it's not going to his head. It's not about, hey, look at me. He's trying to show young people, you know, a positive message. And there's just not enough of that, man. Not in a genuine way. There's a lot of, people, with the sound bites. Yeah, stay in school, blah, blah, blah. But you don't feel like it's coming from the heart with a lot of this messaging. But with Sauce, man, it's like this is real and he believes it and he's living it. And I love it. I think it's great.
Yeah, just reaffirms the whole pick of Sauce going so high. And every time, you look at it and you try to nitpick it, you just can't. There's nothing character wise, performance wise that you can really break down about Sauce and say that he shouldn't have been the pick. And my only hope is that Rob Saleh uses that term old soul and those players actually stick around, because Elijah Moore was the last one we talked about as an old soul, and he didn't stay around long. So I hope Sauce is here to stay. Hope he gets that second contract and nobody has to meet him at a diner to get that done. Any final words before we get on out of here?
No, no. And Jonathan says here it's a different world. And I get that, Jonathan. I get these guys
Sure.
share their whole lives. It's what they're sharing. And the fact that Sauce shared it in a way that I like I wouldn't have thought I'd see an NFL rookie making a video and me thinking I want my kids to watch that. Like my kids are very little. My son loves Sauce. Like this was the first year he really watched football with me. He's 9. He would watch a few minutes of each game last year, but didn't really sit down for the whole game. Now he does, and he asks questions. I don't know if it's because of the name, but he's like every time Sauce makes a play, he's like Sauce, and he loves it. And I love it. So, but I watched that and I thought I would let my kids watch this to show them like this is what it was like for him to come up through the way he came up. So yeah, I get the guy share. You know what I think it was for me, Dylan? You wouldn't remember this, but I'm sure you've heard about it. When I first heard about the documentary, my immediate thought went to when Keyshawn Johnson wrote his book. And I remember as a kid reading Keyshawn Johnson has a book coming out. Like, oh, that's interesting. And it says the book is called Just Give Me the Damn Ball. And it's like, oh, okay. Like, all right,
Yeah,
rookie wide receiver who hasn't done anything. That's an interesting, title choice. And I'm not saying that I thought Sauce was going to be like, self-absorbed, like that.
sure.
Keyshawn is his own level of self-image and how he portrayed himself.
But just not
I
knowing what to
I knew it
expect.
wouldn't be anything like that. Yeah, I just didn't know what it would be. But my first thought was, oh man, that disaster book that Keyshawn wrote. But yeah, gotta love Sauce. Gotta love what he's doing, and looking forward to watching the kid keep getting better.
Yep, and I just see one more comment here, Jonathan. Again, I've been a Jets fan for 50 years, and this is the deepest team I've seen. I'm 28, so I'd have to agree there. If you think it's the deepest, I think it's the deepest, at least since I've been, following this team long enough to, know just not the starters, but the depth guys as well. So I certainly agree. This is one of the deepest teams. It's also one of the most exciting teams that we have to look forward to. I know it's kind of been like a reused slogan every year, the most anticipated Jet season for the past 3 years or whatever, but this year just something feels different, and I know we're going down that road again, but it does feel different, and I think the depth of this team is going to take us to a place where Salah's been preaching finish. Let's go finish the damn job and get it done. And I think the depth that they're adding certainly helps do that. So
Yeah,
we're gonna
it's
end.
fun. It's funny. I do think they're deep. Just to touch on it real quick, but they're like we said, like safety, tackle,
Yep.
QB2. Like there are to me some, tackle isn't that bad off if Becton stays healthy, but like I like Max Mitchell, but I think he gets way too much love. I think
I
that's a
agree.
result of like he outperformed his draft slot, and people love that. He was
Yes,
taken very late, and he played. He was expected to not see the field, and when he played, he held his own, which is good. I'm not knocking that, but I've heard, I think some people have conflated that with like he was dominant or he was. Oh, we have Mitchell coming back.
he's a
Like
starter.
like
Yep.
like there are no questions or concerns if he's on the field. He's a late round pick who did a nice job in limited action, but he's not he's not an established. He's not a guy that you go, well, if he's in this week, we have nothing to worry about. So yeah, but yes, there are some spots where they're very deep, where the talent is very good. Again, we mentioned D line, we mentioned corner, but they could use some help at safety, some help at linebacker, and no, William, I'm not stuck on the draft. I think, in fact, I mean, I still didn't love the approach, but it's over and done with. So you talk about that for a couple weeks and you move on. I will say though, I thought about this earlier how I did change my we as I said I love Tippmann, but I kind of took Salah at his word with that there's going to be a competition. I think there'll be a fall competition. I think Tippmann's going to start. Like, and once I got to
Mhm.
that point, I was like, that's Salah being a coach.
Yeah.
So in my like, I looked at it like, Will McDonald was going to be a rotational guy, so he's not really a starter per se. And Tippmann might not start, but I'm like, he's starting, and Abanikanda should get a ton of carries. So there's a little more help there than I was, looking at sort of 24, 48 hours after the draft, but still didn't love the approach. And that's just, look, that's, if I see something I don't like, I'll say it. But, and
Yep.
as I said at the time, I don't dislike any of the players. I was surprised by the approach. Um, and I just hope Jackson Smith and Jigba doesn't put up 1,500 yards this year. I'm going to be miserable.
Oh, that would be a stab in the gut there for both of us because even live at the
But
pick, we
if
are
but
like
if Will
this.
McDonald gets 12 sacks, who cares?
Exactly. Then Jackson Smith, who it doesn't matter. Exactly. Yeah, I think it's really important. Like you said, you got to talk about the draft. Don't harp on the draft. But when you come away a couple weeks removed, you see the impact that some players can actually have on this roster. And like you said, Abanikanda is that sleeper that is going to come out of this draft class. And at least in the beginning of the season, Brees Hall said they said he's not going to be uh, used a lot in training camp, so he's going to eat up all those reps. But going into the preseason as well, you have to think of Abanikanda as the number 2, maybe even number 1 above Michael Carter. So it's going to be exciting to see how it all shakes out.
And we
We're
didn't
going to
touch
get
on that. We didn't touch on Brees Hall hitting 22 miles
That's
an hour on the
true.
GPS.
Yes, he
And
did.
yes, William, thanks for the comment. And that, look, differences of opinion is what makes this fun sometimes.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
have been doing this for a little while now, but
If you and I agreed on everything, this podcast wouldn't be
yeah, if
fun for people to
everybody
listen to.
watching agreed with everything we said and we agreed with everything we said, then there'd be no point to say anything because everyone would just agree. But yeah, the Brees Hall, 22 miles an hour. I mean, that's crazy, man.
Silly.
He's, but we're seeing it, right? Like, who was it a couple years ago that came back? Was it Kamara? Somebody had the ACL and they were back like in under a year and just blowing up.
I
With,
forget who it was, but yes, it was within like a calendar year. They were back on the field and they were killing it.
and
Yep.
now you got Brees Hall. That was week what, 5, 6 against
Yeah.
Denver,
Yep.
4, whatever it was.
Yeah.
We're not even at training camp yet, and he's doing agility drills outside and hitting 22 on the GPS. So I think he's gonna be ready. I think he's gonna be ready to go. And
Yep.
that's, again, that is another part of what makes this so exciting is you look at what he did last year against stacked boxes, and now with defenses backed off because of Aaron Rodgers, he's gonna have running room. Izzy Abanikanda is gonna have running room. Just start the season already. It's enough.
And that's what I'm saying. And I wanted to say we talked about agreeing and disagreeing, and that might come with the team rankings and how we're going to break down offensive and defensive players. We're going to put them into a couple different buckets. So that's going to be a fun topic to carry us, and hopefully kill some time because August 3rd can't come here fast enough. That Hall of Fame game, I circled it on my calendar. I don't know exactly how many days. I have the countdown on my phone, but August 3rd, that Hall of Fame game, it's coming quick. So I'm really excited. For Glenn, you can follow him on Twitter at JNRadio_Glenn. That's Glenn with 2 N's. You can follow his draft account at JetsPicks, at JetsPicks. Just really just scratching the surface on 2024, both of us. I'm starting the spring games. I know Glenn's been putting out tons of videos of you know,
Yeah, I've been
even
quiet. I've been a little bit quiet lately, but I might be. I was actually looking at who was I watching? I was watching BYU Oregon earlier to get a look at a BYU lineman and some Oregon. So yeah, there's maybe some clips coming out in the next several hours to sometime tomorrow.
yeah, definitely be on the lookout for that at Jets PICKS. You can follow me on Twitter at DTerman, and you can follow Jet Nation on all social media platforms: Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter. That's it for us for this week. Maybe we'll be back if breaking news happens. Maybe Quinnen gets paid or the Rodgers deal becomes more official. We'll see. But for now, we're getting into that slow point of the season, so we're going to have to, maybe do some shorter shows and come up with more talking points. And hopefully none of them are saying Aaron Rodgers is the third best quarterback in any state, because that's just categorically false. So we appreciate everybody in the comments. We really appreciate your interaction. It really helps bring the show along, because your talking points create our talking points. So we love having that live chat there. So thank you everybody for tuning in, and we'll catch you next week. Let's go Jets.